Greetings and welcome everybody, Anthony Mars Jr. on PR Lost Galaxy 2014, and welcome to Terra Adventure Podcast episode 315. Presented by My Morphin Megaverse Power Rangers Facebook group. Haven't seen any? Check them out now. Oh my god, I mean, this here was a wish fulfillment I've had for 8 years, and once more guys, this is another fan fiction type of thread thing on the podcast related to Power Rangers and some mashup that I had in mind long ago in terms of fan fiction with another franchise. Now, for many of you, and I know this is something that I've been trying to tell everybody what my Power Rangers Lost Galaxy fan film of the Rise of Trakeena was originally going to be for so long, and finally for 8 years, I'm finally going to share this with you. And for those who are not into as a disclaimer, if you're not interested into this kind of fanfic ramble that I'm going to talk about, then maybe you shouldn't be, listening to this, because if you're not interested in my little Power Rangers fanfics and all that stuff and mashups with other franchises, maybe you can just click away. And for those who want to listen to what I have to say about this, go ahead and listen to what I have to say about this. So, for the longest time since I did this Power Rangers Lost Galaxy fan film thing, and for the longest time since 2010, 2011, I have been talking about a Power Rangers fan film, mashup that was in mind since my 12th grade year in high school. And for some of those, I understand this was back in the time when nobody really cared about me being in the fandom and doing this fan film thing, and especially in the medium that I was doing in representation. When I was doing Power Rangers Lost Galaxy The Rise of Trakeena 8 years ago, which I had to abandon in 2012, 6 years ago at the exact, because of creative differences and whatnot, and why the film was never made completely, and it was supposed to meet its respective release date and deadline for 2011 until I decided to abandon it altogether because of those problems. Now, for the longest time, I have been saying that I've been wanting to do a Power Rangers Lost Galaxy fan film of the Rise of Trakeena in the style of G.I. Joe. Now, for those who have came across my type of video commentaries and podcasts and stuff back 5 years ago in 2013, later in 2013 when I was ranting off, video responding, doing commentary, various commentary videos on a particular, local YouTuber who was a man-child and stuff. For those who saw now bear in mind that my most popular podcast, an older one, that had this amount of views where it was like Power Rangers versus another franchise to see who had the better characters and stuff. My Power Rangers versus Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles video is like my most popular podcast, or so if it was a podcast back then, but a commentary video that I did in 2013, and 5 years straight, it's like the most popular podcast I have ever thought would gain that many views, because everybody knows that Power Rangers and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles have a lot in common. But here, this is not a comparison piece. This is something that was originally a wish fulfillment during the time when I was doing that Power Rangers Lost Galaxy fan film that I was doing in high school with the paper dolls and such, where if Power Rangers Lost Galaxy was like G.I. Joe The Rise of Cobra. And I know this is kind of awkward. Now, for any G.I. Joe fans listening, now, you're probably going to wonder, a Power Rangers fan trying to take a crappy G.I. Joe movie that we all hated and then trying to mesh the two awful things together and think that this is really going to be something. Well, as a matter of fact, this was going to be something. Because, I know for the longest time, one of the reasons why the Rise of Trakeena didn't live up to its potential and expectations in the past was because I was dealing with some personal problems, and as well as, maybe it's the fact that I was compromised, and also everything was interfered behind the scenes of when I was doing the film. Now, I know many of you listening are going to think that all of this is made up, and the whole, compromisation of the fan film, and, people ruining it was all BS, it's fake, and with knowing half of the story was real, but again, when I was going around blaming this person in my former school for this, blaming this person in my former school for that, blah blah blah, I realized. Now, mind you guys, I was in the 12th grade in 2010, 2011 when I did this. Because at the same time when I was doing this, I was going in the vein of G.I. Joe and particularly taking Power Rangers Lost Galaxy, a season of Power Rangers that, well, by the way, yes, we know Lost Galaxy is one of the best seasons of Power Rangers ever. But suppose if Lost Galaxy, you know, my fan film, when I was starting to want to make fan films at a very young age, around 18, right around senior year, high school, and I was about to get out of high school, but I realized I knew I was set for failure as soon as I didn't meet up deadlines, expectations. And that's why up to this point, 8 years later, no wonder I spent all decade of the 2010s worth of my time in my early adult years, even up to now, still doing Power Rangers Lost Galaxy, the Rise of Trakeena. And if something didn't work out the way it was supposed to, then I would have to abandon a previous concept and come up with a different concept of what the movie could have been about. But then I decided this mashup with Rise of Cobra with Lost Galaxy just wouldn't work. Now, for those who heard of the times I rambled about RPM being like G.I. Joe, the Rise of Cobra, and X-Men Origins, Wolverine, I personally think that G.I. Joe, the Rise of Cobra could have been a bigger match with Power Rangers Lost Galaxy when I was doing that fan film. Now, I know that G.I. Joe, The Rise of Cobra, has been out for almost 9 years, well, come August. Even though 2009 has been 2009 feels like it's been ages ago. And knowing to the fact that Power Rangers Lost Galaxy will be 20 years old next year, and that in G.I. Joe, the first movie came out, will be 10 years old next year in 2019. And knowing that, speaking of which, there will be a G.I. Joe movie reboot in 2 years from now, in March of 2020, the beginning of the 2020s. Because I know it's been over 5 years since the last G.I. Joe movie, that being Retaliation with The Rock and Bruce Willis and such. But I wanted to, this was one of those, you see, when I was in high school when I did this kind of thing, taking G.I. Joe and Power Rangers and married the two, Frankenstein, the two things that I loved so much, I realized I wanted to go with that concept when I did this fan film because, well, due to the fact that, for those who remember back when we had the Super Bowl 43 9 years ago in 2009, and for those who saw the Super Bowl trailer for G.I. Joe, I thought the movie was going to be awesome, and I know before we had the trailers, I looked up a little bit of information that was available for Rise of Cobra with who was playing, Cobra Commander, Duke, and the Baroness, and Snake Eyes and such, and Storm Shadow, and who was directing the film, that being Van Helsing, Mummy director himself, Stephen Sommers, who, by the way, one of the worst film directors ever, would be, see what this G.I. Joe movie would be like. And then when I found out that there was some early teaser posters for some of the following characters, like Duke, the Baroness, and Snake Eyes and such, then I was like, well, you see, I was still in high school around this time, guys. This was long before I was PR Lost Galaxy 2014. Between the 11th and the 12th grade, this is when I was, trying to get into G.I. Joe, even though I wasn't that big on G.I. Joe, like I said, over and over growing up. And I was more into Transformers. So anyway, but when 2009 rolled in to see what G.I. Joe: The Rise of Cobra was going to be like, and based on the some of the footage the first bits of footage they were showing a TV spot or a trailer, a Super Bowl trailer, then I was like, oh man, this movie's going to be sick. But then I realized time went on. This was long again before I was on YouTube and stuff, because again, I was around 16, 17 years old, minor, still living with my only parent at the time. And I wasn't allowed to be on the internet and stuff, and however, I slickly was on the internet by around in my late 17 years of age, around this time 2010, between January, March, and such of 2010, around this point, and I was going around, hoping this, back when I was such and such with what's her face from TNA Impact, the Scream Queen goth chick. Anyway, so it was like, okay, so after I've seen Rise of Cobra and once when it came out August of 2009, but I didn't wait to see the movie on DVD until 2010 because. And as soon as I saw G.I. Joe, The Rise of Cobra, but even though actually what I did was, note to the fact I was in special ed, had movie day on some Fridays and stuff, and one of those days someone would have G.I. Joe in one of the, for me to watch, and when I saw G.I. Joe, The Rise of Cobra, that gave me a sense that I wanted to do, I looked at due to the fact that deep down that back then, and you see, this is one of the reasons why I was afraid to tell everyone that I was a Power Rangers fan earlier on in my middle school years, early to mid high school years, up until the 12th grade. That if I tell everyone that I'm a Power Rangers fan and such and stuff, then I would get completely bullied again. But due to the fact I was in my junior year in high school at this time when G.I. Joe came out, I actually was barely bullied, and nobody really bothered with me at that point. But yeah, during my freshman and sophomore years, people bullied me. But by my junior and senior years, nobody bullied me. So that was a fact. And so it gave me a sense that, okay, well, due to the fact that my favorite season, and everybody knows, Lost Galaxy was always my favorite Power Ranger series. So, basing on some of the way how the characters were in Lost Galaxy, like Trakeena, the Magna Defender, Scorpius, Leo, Kendricks, etc., I was wondering if I can imagine the Lost Galaxy characters in some of the roles of the G.I. Joe Rise of Cobra movie characters. Like, as I go through this video, and bear with me since this is a fanfic related video, this was basically what my Rise of Trakeena fan film was. But now also, speaking of which, when I did Power Rangers Lost Galaxy The Rise of Trakeena 8 years ago, until I abandoned it 6 years ago, I didn't use, for the Rangers, I didn't even use the names of Leo and Damon and Kendricks and Maya and Kai as the Galaxy Rangers present while dealing with Scorpius and Trakeena during a mashup of if Power Rangers Lost Galaxy was like G.I. Joe The Rise of Cobra when I did the fan film. Now, the original idea was to make the fan film like The Rise of Cobra, where, of course, Trakeena, now for those who watched Power Rangers Lost Galaxy like I have in the fandom, Trakeena was the main villain of Lost Galaxy, but even though beforehand it was her father Scorpius, and Rise of Trakeena was a bit of a hybrid of the storyline of her character, but still emulating something that Sienna Miller's Baroness did in G.I. Joe, where, again, we'll get into all that other stuff if I got time when I get to that stuff. And then when I was taking elements of her character, about her storyline, about her and her father, her father didn't want her to go out taking out the Power Rangers and Terra Venture, and due to the fact that the fan film, also utilized some of the same plot thread as Rise of Cobra with some nanomite warhead thing. Now, if only if there was a Power Rangers equivalent to what G.I. Joe had for those nanomite warheads that they had in their movie back in 2009. The Galaxy book is a mystical, intergalactic MacGuffin that was used, in terms of, for research, and, that's one of the reasons why the Galaxy book, to be honest, in the show was pretty pointless. But suppose if, I can't say the Galaxy book, the Lights of Orion, there has to be, Lost Galaxy, there's got to be something, unless I have to make something up to, to fill in the void of the nanomite warhead plot that they had in Rise of Cobra for Power Rangers. And actually, this was actually one of the most vaguest instances. I wanted to do a dark and gritty Power Rangers Lost Galaxy fan film. Like gritty, like Christopher Nolan Batman with Power Rangers. Really, when you deep down think about it, G.I. Joe The Rise of Cobra did feel a bit like a dark and gritty reimagining of G.I. Joe, but of course it wasn't a G.I. Joe movie nobody wanted. But yet, why you think it made over $300 million at the box office, and a sequel was greenlit with The Rock as Roadblock, and Adrian Palicki and Bruce Willis and whoever was in the sequel. And so yeah, I was trying to figure out, now as I go through this video, I'm going to bring up characters that would be like the characters from the Rise of Cobra movie of the G.I. Joe franchise. And I'm going to have to start from the top with the Rangers. So the first character that I would say that was like such and such with the G.I. Joe team. And I know this is going to be a bit, what's that word I'm looking for? Forget it. But actually, the first character that I would say that would be very similar if I was, back then when I was doing doing Rise of Trakeena, but even though that's why, later on due to some behind the scenes mishaps and crap, and when I was doing my movie during high school and when I wasn't focused on my schoolwork and stuff, at first, it was supposed to be like, Rise of Cobra, but that's when I turned into more like Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego, Power Rangers. But anyway, now at one point, Magna Defender would be like Snake Eyes. Now, I thought this would be a good combo of representation of, if like I said, what if Lost of Galaxy was like G.I. Joe, the Rise of Cobra thing. And on to the fact that Rise of Cobra by 2009, it was just coming out. And on to the fact 2009, at the time, 9 years ago, Power Rangers Lost of Galaxy, well, when RPM was airing, also 9 years ago, had its 10th anniversary. But, of course, next year will be the big 20th anniversary of Lost Galaxy. So when next year will be 20 years of Lost Galaxy, I don't know, once if I do that Power Rangers Legacy Universe fan film reboot of Lost Galaxy, I don't know if I want to go back to that original thread, my original concept of Rise of Trakeena, reuse that, or actually just come up with something different, since due to the fact Rise of Cobra was ages ago. It's old. It's an old film, and I don't think people really care about that anymore nowadays than compared to when people didn't care for it when it first came out. I mean, yeah, Magna the Defender would have been like Snake Eyes when I did this fan film, but the difference is, knowing for those who are G.I. Joe fans, and for someone that was a casual and still casual G.I. Joe now, Snake Eyes never talked. He was the silent ninja Zen master dude, and I've always loved Snake Eyes in all of his iterations of G.I. Joe, facing Storm Shadow all the time. It's just I just love him. I mean, the black, this whole black ninja, white ninja. I know you can say some racial stuff about Snake Eyes is a Negro and the Storm Shadow is a white guy, but is actually Asian dude in the ninja outfit. But yeah, because also when you think about Snake Eyes' weapons, being both a katana sword and a gun. But the difference between him, that on the Power Ranger side of things, Magna Defender, knowing us and me included as a fan, Magna Defender, his weapon is both a sword and a gun. Sorry, sword and a gun, and which is actually more cooler than what Snake Eyes would have. But now I don't know. I mean, now when I did the Rise of Trakeena long ago, I mean, I should have pitted Magna Defender with Villamax in the same vein as Magna Defender. I mean, Snake Eyes versus Storm Shadow. Now, bear in mind that we know that in Power Rangers Lost Galaxy, Magna Defender and Tretron had a thing, but in Rise of Trakeena, when I did my original Rise of Trakeena story, now when we bring up Villamax, Tretron was, Tretron and Magna Defender always had a thing, so I wanted to see how it would have fit with, because due to the fact I didn't have Furio, Tretron, almost all of the Lost Galaxy villains in the Void. So I only picked about like 5 or 6 Lost Galaxy villains to fill in the Void. Now, also excluding Kegler, since Kegler didn't even do anything in Lost Galaxy. So I can't see Kegler for some role, like, let's say if Kegler was like Zartan, because that wouldn't fit, or Kegler as Dr. Mindbender from the movie, which wouldn't fit. So that's why I decided, instead of Tretron and Magna Defender like Snake Eyes versus Storm Shadow, I went with Villamax versus Magna Defender instead. Again, me matching up, knowing me for, who's seen Ginga Man a few times here and there, and seeing that in Ginga Man, Bull Black and Sabash had a thing 3,000 some years ago, or something like that, again, like in the Sentai. So I was going for that approach with Villamax versus Magna Defender. Now, Villamax, in my original fan film pitch of Rise of Trakeena, when going by, mashing up G.I. Joe with Power Rangers Lost Galaxy, Villamax and Trakeena, knowing our source material, and, again, we'll get to Trakeena since she's the big beef of the thing, due to the fact that Rise of Trakeena was supposed to be what I wanted it based off this movie and stuff, but instead I decided, due to all the things that was going on again behind the scenes, and I digress. So Villamax was going to be like Storm Shadow, you know, who is wise and, you know, wise, noble, resilient, and such like that. There will be loyalty to Trakeena still with him, but of course, you know, Kegler was absent in this pitch when I originally did this. And well, you know, now we all know in G.I. Joe: The Rise of Cobra, Storm Shadow and the Baroness were mostly with each other, but knowing to the fact, I think that's one of the reasons why people didn't like Rise of Cobra was because Baroness and Destro, like most of their incarnations, comic, cartoon, such and such, were always together, because Destro and the Baroness were always, you know, romantically involved, but Storm Shadow and Baroness had no chemistry. But I see what the movie was doing. They wanted to reimagine the characters from because I think that I'll give you this with Rise of Cobra, as much as I realize I'm at the point where I don't like it anymore, is that I liked the fact they were reimagining G.I. Joe from their original 1980s cartoon counterparts, because to be honest though, guys, for someone who was a casual G.I. Joe fan, when I watched some episodes of the original cartoon of G.I. Joe from the 80s, I have to admit that the 1980s cartoon was a bit too cheesy in my taste, even for a 30-some-year-old G.I. Joe cartoon, which, yeah, so I digress there as well. So I was thinking about making Villamax more like Storm Shadow, even though I originally wanted Trecheron in this void, but I decided Villamax because, you know, you guys know me, you know, in terms of In Space and Lost Galaxy, when Ecliptor and Villamax, you see, it's just, I just like Villamax. I really wanted to see Villamax if he was like Storm Shadow, facing, instead of Trecheron facing Magna Defender, because we all know in our show of Power Rangers, Magna Defender and Trecheron had a thing, like I said again, so that's why I wanted Villamax versus Magna Defender instead. Even though there was at a point where in my original pitch, you know, before I did, you know, what my original pitch was also, Villamax could have been like, you know, Christopher Eccleston's Destro in the film, but I decided to put Villamax in Storm Shadow's stead when I did the script originally. The next character that was G.I. Joe versus Power Rangers when I did this fan film mashup, before it became something else when I actually started working on the fan film in September of 8 years ago in 2010, back in my final year in Gaithersburg High School, in 2010, 2011. I know I've been, you know, wishing this aspect of the fan film, you know, when I was mashing up G.I. Joe with Lost Galaxy. The Stingwingers would be like the Neo Vipers from the film. And even now, 8 years later, I'm still using those designs of the Neo Vipers from the movie for the Stingwingers' new designs. Because, well, to be honest though, actually when you come to think of it, anytime I see the Neo Vipers in G.I. Joe, I see the Stingwingers in Power Rangers Lost Galaxy. And I think that's one of the reasons why I don't know why I had to compare RPM with this movie, when knowing Lost Galaxy and this G.I. Joe movie should have been comparable with each other. Knowing again that 2009 was the 10th anniversary of Lost Galaxy, while this was just coming out that time 9 years ago. So whenever I look at the Neo Vipers designs, you know, face notwithstanding because of the black eye holes, but the Stingwingers never really had eyes, just like insect facial design to them, creature design. So what if if I were to take the typical Neo Viper helmet, repaint that, repaint some, like paint it over to make it look like a Stingwinger, and then also like probably put some red earmuffs. Oh, no, it wouldn't make sense. So I think it's best to keep the little red circled ears off the Stingwingers, absent, and just go with the, the yellow stripes that represent what it looks like a mutant insectoid, bug or insectoid fly. Man, the hiccups. And go ahead, make that look like a Stingwinger, and then also have some armor around it to have the armor be more mobile than what we actually have from our Stingwingers from the Stingwingers from our show, because that was my original intention. I wanted to see the Stingwingers like the Neo Vipers, because I was quite unsure whether if I wanted to make them like the Neo Vipers or not. Because, you know, to be honest though, actually one of the few positive things I still like from that movie, even though I haven't watched it in so long, the Neo Vipers have the most badass foot soldier design G.I. Joe's franchise, not Power Rangers, has ever had. And, yeah, I mean, and also, you know, also due to the fact that for someone like me who's a Power Rangers fan and not much of a Joe fan, what I also liked about the Neo Vipers, you know, for me as a Power Rangers fan, they do got that feel of the Quantrons, but at least you can actually hear them actually speak English and not have that very distorted vocal tone that the Quantrons and Power Rangers in space would have. So that's why I was going with that approach with the Stingwingers. Now, I know the Stingwingers are bugs, mutant bugs. And now I know the original pitch of my fan film was to have Trakeena come up with an army of Stingwingers, Stingwingers in my original vision of the fan film was to have her Stingwingers as super soldiers and not the wimpy bug soldiers that would attack Terra in the Power Rangers. Every time, and especially when Scorpius and Trakeena would send their Monster of the Week, knowing the show with whatever, if it's Cannon Brawl or Crew Mummy or Chameleac or Magnetox, well, he made the Stingwingers and the Wusses actually, or whatever monster they had and attacked the Rangers that instance, then maybe she could have, you know, like made the Stingwingers be like combat foot soldiers, you know, elitist foot soldiers that were like the Neo Vipers that can talk and, you know, holding up rifles and, you know, that would like rifle guns that would shoot lasers instead of the, you know, their pinchers that they could use to try to pinch, you know, civilian casualties on Terra Venture. But I know that's going to sound like a stupid idea, isn't it? So that was my original vision of the Stingwingers if they were the Neo Viper. The next character from Lost Galaxy versus Rise of Cobra, you know, G.I. Joe, when I was originally doing this pitch, you know, originally, now to represent, you know, if the blue, you know, if anyone would be, you know, Breaker from Rise of Cobra, but with Power Rangers, it has to be the Blue Ranger. Even though Breaker didn't even do as much in the film, but knowing the Power Rangers, they have to go all out and try to attack the, now the Blue Ranger, you know, due to the fact that Breaker, knowing him in the film, the G.I. Joe movie that we had, Breaker was only, you know, a tech assistant for the Joe team, also being on the microphone and stuff like that aside. And, you know, I know Breaker was my least favorite character in the film, but actually I felt that the Blue Ranger would be in his position, you know, his role as tech assistant, but he can still also help fight the Rangers. Facing what should have been Trakeena's army instead of, you know, then I'll end up turning around and making Scorpius the main villain, because again, we'll get the Scorpius in a moment. And then, the Blue Ranger, that being would have been either my character or Kai Chen, because, you know, if I were to go with the original series, I should have went with the original lineup of Leo, Damon, Mike, Maya, Kendricks, and Kai. But this pitch eventually has something totally different. Instead of using Leo's team facing Trakeena for this mashup, it was again my characters for my Marshverse of characters of Power Rangers. If they were the Lost Galaxy Rangers in the near but not too distant future, Terra Venture would exist in the year 2010, 2011 in this alternate continuity basically, which unfortunately I knew was not going to make sense. And knowing to the fact that the Yellow Ranger, now let's get to the Yellow Ranger, and you see, and I know this was the more controversial thing I've ever done, due to the fact that when I originally did Rise of Cobra, Trakeena, sorry. No, Rise of Cobra was Hasbro and Steven Sommers, and I'm sorry. Rise of Trakeena, me as a Power Rangers fan, excuse me. Now, the reason why I didn't want to make the Yellow Ranger one of the main characters completely if it was a girl from, like, knowing our show in Lost Galaxy, knowing Maya, okay, look, now Maya, as great of a fan favorite character she is and still now to those, but knowing the fan, I never really cared for Maya. Maya could have been like CoverGirl's character, because maybe it's the fact that I just didn't like Maya. I mean, So that's why when I came up with my team of Rangers, to face off Trakeena for this continuity while mashing up beat for beat, plot point after plot point from G.I. Joe, that's where I came in doing that self-insert character of AJ, which I brought up in that Morphing Grid case study, Redux, and old video on this channel and such, where AJ as the Yellow Ranger would be like Ripcord's character. That was Marlon Wayans' character in the film, based on my original pitch. Having both the Red Ranger and Yellow Ranger, come in, that being, my character of AJ with Tony Marshall, not Leo, come in, and we were inducted to be the new Lost Galaxy Rangers. And then I had a, what G.I. Joe had was an affiliation calling them, having, headquarters known as the Pit. Now, for my version of telling that story, now Terra Venture does exist in my plot, but it's just there were barely glimpses of the space colony in my original pitch. And also, there was a underground facility for the Power Rangers, since the Rangers don't have a mentor, I had to come up with a commanding officer mentor kind of character for the Galaxy Rangers basing on that pitch. And now, if I were to go with Leo's team, maybe I should have made Damon in Ripcord's shoes, and let's say heavy duty, another black character who will be the Green Ranger. I'll get to the Green Ranger in a second. Was removed and would have just been let's have Leo like Duke, Kai like Breaker to some extent. Damon would be like Ripcord. Maya would have been like CoverGirl. Kendricks would be like Scarlet, and Mike, speaking like Snake Eyes. And that way, that's how I would have did it, because, knowing us for Power Rangers Lost Galaxy, and knowing to the fact people have been telling me that when I originally did my fan film, and when I pitched the fan casting and stuff for this, and when I was, again, when I was, around this time 8 years ago, I was dumb and young at age 18. I didn't know no better early in the decade on the internet and stuff, on the Ranger Wiki and whatever. And then people criticized me years ago for making the Yellow Lost Galaxy Ranger a man, just because, in Ginga Man, and I've said this before, in the original and Redux Morphic Grid case study archive videos on my channel, where I said that I wanted the Yellow Ranger to be a man instead of a woman if I'm going to do this mashup of G.I. Joe with Power Rangers Lost Galaxy, and that's what I tried to do back then. Back when it's been over 8 years of development hell, and that's why what evolved to what would become this. And knowing to the fact that Rise of Cobra is just, it was G.I. Joe, the Rise of Cobra was a thing, but the movie, of course, was awful, but that's why I went with that approach of trying to go with what I was trying to work with at the time. So yeah, and when I made that OC Yellow Ranger of mine, I wanted him like Ripcord, because knowing me, I like Marlon Wayans and the Wayans brothers and such and all that. But what got my attention was hearing that Marlon Wayans was going to be in the G.I. Joe movie. That's what got me all hooked, because knowing the fact I've always liked the Wayans, in everything they were in almost, especially Marlon, so that's why I wanted to see Marlon in a G.I. Joe movie, much like I think that's what inspired me to put myself, and I know I was self-inserting myself as a Power Ranger, but then I realized that was once more bad wish fulfilling, wishing that I was part of the franchise, with that OC character of mine, and not use what was Serena Vincent's Maya character. If I had an actress, if let's say if Maya, if she was not from Miranoi, Maya would be just like a female gender bent version of Ripcord, with being already friends with Leo, and her and Leo were part of this military, for remember Nasada from In Space. Now, Nasada and Terra Venture were in, relations with each other, and Leo and Maya were from Earth, but instead of, because in my version, if I were to have Maya, Leo and them still the Lost Galaxy Rangers in this fan film, mashup reimagining of G.I. Joe with Lost Galaxy, then Maya could have been like No. Actually, I actually did said Damon and Leo, like Duke and Ripcord from the movie. Maya would have been just like a minor character, and I don't know how that would have went down from there. But yeah, I mean, personally, now let's move on to the Green Ranger. The Green Ranger, basically, when I originally did this fan film, now if I were to still stick with, again, with the original character names of Leo and Damon in them, now the Green Ranger, now let's say if this was Damon Henderson, in this G.I. Joe Power Rangers Lost Galaxy mashup fan film when I did this back years ago, before I instead of using Leo's character, Leo and their characters, I decided to have my characters if they were the Lost Galaxy Rangers and such again. And suppose if the Green Ranger was a hybrid between Heavy Duty and Ripcord, because we all know that in Lost Galaxy, Damon was always the comic relief, the rookie, why do I always have to be the decoy, and all that crap, and always being the Joker of the team, and bringing levity and the wild by nature kind of character that he is, with that playful by nature kind of life of the party of the Lost Galaxy team. Ripcord and G.I. Joe was partly the same, because knowing him and Duke were friends, when they came into the G.I. Joe team from the start, from the movie and stuff, and when they were ambushed by the Baroness and so forth, and him and Duke had a thing with the Baroness and Cobra Commander when they were previously Anna and Rex Lewis and such like that. But I decided to drop that all together and have the Green Ranger lean towards a Heavy Duty's portrayal, because I felt that with the Green Ranger, due to the fact that the Green Ranger is a lightweight. Now, Heavy Duty, name and punning name intended. He's the heavy weapons expert of the group, but I wanted to see if I wanted to reimagine the Green Ranger, being the weapons expert for the Rangers. And suppose if we had the Quasar launchers, and the Quasar launchers were like those RPGs with heavy pieces of that would make a heavy artillery, heavy laser kind of machine gun that the Rangers would use to blow up Stingwingers with. But I realized that really wouldn't make no sense. And knowing to the fact that if I were to still have the Green Ranger on the side of of Ripcord, where Ripcord was the comic relief funny black guy, because knowing Damon in Lost Galaxy, he was the comic relief as well. And but again, I decided to make my Yellow Ranger like Ripcord instead, because I felt that, I just felt that when this is why I'm going to regret and being so ungrateful, self-inserting myself, if I was once more a Power Ranger back when nobody cared about me being something like this. And then also because, again, bear in mind, guys, before I did 2014 and Rise of Trakeena, this fan film also had paper dolls for characters, and I wanted to, back then reimagine Lost Galaxy if it was like like the G.I. Joe movie we had before Retaliation, and the up-and-coming soon-to-be reboot that's still in development but hasn't found its cast and such yet. Since I've talked it long enough about Yellow and Green, let's focus on Scarlet versus the Pink Galaxy Ranger. Now, again, if I were to still use Leo's team for this reimagining of Rise of Trakeena before I came up with my own female character to be the Pink Lost Galaxy Ranger, in the portrayal of Scarlet from the film, what if Kendricks would, instead of her, get killed off midway through a movie or anything, what if Kendricks was like Scarlet? But, now, knowing to the fact that Kendricks, knowing by the casting of Valerie Vernon and Melanie Perkins later on as Corone, both are blonde heads. And I can't, it just can't, it wouldn't feel right having, Kendricks, red hair, ginger hair, being the Pink Galaxy Ranger, doesn't wear the glasses, and knowing to the fact that Kendricks, knowing in the original show when I was originally going with this original pitch, and I figured that's one of those reasons why I used my characters, those no-name OC characters of mine to be the Galaxy Rangers instead of Kendricks and Leo in them, again, is because I just don't think Kendricks would fit that void. Now, if Kendricks was like CoverGirl, because now, spoilers for those who haven't seen Rise of Cobra, but Zartan did assassinate CoverGirl. So what if something like that happened to Kendricks, if Kendricks was more like Cover Girl and Maya was like Scarlet or something like that, but then we wouldn't have Corone in this void, because again, I was not going to have every character from Lost Galaxy in this mashup of that movie, so I had to try to fit in what characters fit in the voids or not. So yeah, I wanted to imagine, so at some point, whoever my OC character of the Pink Ranger, or have the original character Kendricks in the void of Scarlet by Rachel Nichols in the film, I mean, it could have worked. Now, like G.I. Joe, now if Destro and Baroness have a thing, personally, I should have went with, if I were to go back in time and did this instead of coming with my characters of Tony and AJ in them, I would have just made Kendricks and Mike have a romantic relationship, to match up with the Scarlet Snake Eyes thing. Or I could have just stick with the Leo Kendricks thing, which I'll do soon when I do that PRLG reboot of Lost Galaxy soon. That depends on how I'll come up with that. I have to, work up a story for that first, for that film overall. And yeah, because I felt that Scarlet, Kendricks, with that mashup there, knowing both female characters have bow arrow weapons, but except that, knowing to the fact that that's the thing with the Galaxy Rangers. The trans daggers are okay weapons, but they just don't use them as often. The only time they use their trans daggers is only when they're in the Megazord. But I know they have used them on foot combat against Stingwingers and Swabbies and whatnot, looking back, knowing my passing knowledge of Lost Galaxy. But again, if Kendricks, instead of using her Quasar Saber all the time, she could have emulated what Scarlet did, using her beta bow formation of her trans dagger, and did bow arrows shooting Stingwingers in the face and ass and all that stuff, like Scarlet did when she shot down Neo Vipers with her bow and arrow. But again, and her archer. But then again, that's what I would have done that with her character if I were to go with that approach. Last but not least, for the Rangers, since I'm not doing everyone at once, actually, we'll come back to the Red Ranger later. Okay, maybe the Red Ranger. All right. So if I didn't go with my OC Red Ranger of Tony Marshall, I would have still did Leo, and compared him to Duke, Channing Tatum's Duke. Now at one point of all the time I've been, wish fulfilling this moment, that Duke and Leo were exactly the same character in my original pitch. Because in G.I. Joe, The Rise of Cobra, while Duke was one of the many two characters that were inducted into the G.I. Joe team to go after Cobra, who wanted to make a super weapon to annihilate the entire world from underwater and such with those missiles, nanomite warhead missile, and annihilate the whole world, Duke did had a story arc that I felt was very driven, but even though it was a formulaic storyline where, okay, main hero blames himself for the death of his ex-fiance's brother's death. Her ex-fiance, now evil, wants to wants revenge against her ex-boyfriend for letting her brother die. So that's why she's also brainwashed to go after main male protagonist, and especially that, and then also, and main protagonist has doubts about why did he let her fiance's brother die, and that's why some years later, his ex-girlfriend comes back and be's a total, Joe killing machine bitch that she is. You see, that's probably also one of the few reasons why a lot of people didn't like the movie neither, was that when the hell in the history of G.I. Joe, in terms of the source material, has Duke and the Baroness has ever had a thing for each other? Zero. Not one other further incarnation of G.I. Joe, past and present, has ever had Duke and the Baroness in a relationship. Known to the fact, most incarnations of G.I. Joe, Duke and Baroness never had a relationship. That was all Destro, whose name also starts with the letter D, capital D, But I was going to do something like that with Leo's character when I did this pitch too, when I was going by what I saw from that movie as well. Because again, this was back when I was in high school, being all ecstatic, based on how I felt with the concept and the execution of the movie, despite the fact the movie kind of, knowing the film, it had a bad script, so what? But the fact is, I was trying to mesh it up to think that Power Rangers Lost Galaxy, if I were to take the two things, Frankenstein the two things, when I was doing this fan film, before I came up with the Martiverse and stuff and all that random stuff I did with 2014 and Wrath of Trakeena later on in life, that's what I was trying to do. And I think Rise of Trakeena was supposed to be this kind of fan film. And I think I've been trying to tell everyone in the fandom about this for 8 years. And I know it's been 8 years, a little too soon, too late to tell everyone about what the fan film was supposed to be before I canceled it. And that's what the concept was supposed to be with the characters and the story and stuff. The story would have been exactly the same, except that due to the fact that if G.I. Joe's way of telling that story sucks, maybe I should make this the same movie with, but featuring characters from Power Rangers in the void of G.I. Joe and in that story when they were, it's the Rise of Cobra. That means before Cobra Commander was actually Cobra Commander and before Destro actually had the tin metal face head of his and skull and whatever. So I was trying to see if I was going to go with that approach of doing a Power Rangers Lost Galaxy reboot that way before I came up with the Power Rangers Lost Galaxy fan film reboot that you all know that, of course, by the way, people bashed 4 years ago because it just wasn't a good concept, personally, looking back. And, but if I were to have Leo still the Red Ranger for this fan film reboot reimagining, now this is where I felt that, now this is going to be a bit awkward, but knowing to the fact that, knowing in the source material, now that Leo, not that I don't like Leo, but the thing is the fact that Leo didn't had much of relationships, even though he just had eye-to-eye contact with Kendricks, Maya, and Corone from time to time. That's why Lost Galaxy didn't have time to develop a Red Ranger, Pink Ranger romance or Red Ranger, Yellow Ranger romance that was once multiple times established back in Zeo and in Space respectively, like Zeo's Red and Pink Ranger thing, later with Time Force and Dino Charge, and also a Red Ranger, Yellow Ranger romance like Andros and Ashley back in Space, the season prior to Lost Galaxy. But this was going to be awkward going by what I've seen from the movie, from this movie beat for beat, and it's going to be awkward when we get to Trakeena. Okay, due to the fact that my original, if I were to, again, like I said, if I were to still go with the original character names of Leo, Damon, and Kai and them, I would have pit Leo and Trakeena in a relationship before Trakeena went rogue and Trakeena would hate the Power Rangers and basically, instead of making, knowing to the fact Rise of Cobra had Cobra Commander as the main antagonist, completely the main surprise villain. But actually, to be honest, though, looking back on Rise of Cobra, seeing that the Baroness was the only female villain and the only badass in the film, so I had to fit our ever-beloved praying mantis headdress wearing daddy's girl of Scorpius turned warrior of all evil in all the universe in the Baroness instead. So I figured, okay, now let's focus on Trakeena, because this was basically what I've been trying to do for a long time before I started doing all that random crap I did that was really condescending and desecrating the original character later on. The thing with a lot of some of these action movies, and sometimes it's superhero movies, mostly action movies that are just dumb popcorn fun type movies like G.I. Joe, for instance, you have movies like this where you have an actress playing a femme fatale female villain, and despite as badass they can be, you do have them wearing partly a scantily clad outfit, mostly midriff where you can show bits of some cleavage to that costume. Okay, so that's where Mrs. F from my former high school got so offended by, was because when I originally wanted to cast her to do the voice, when I wanted volunteers to have her as my as Trakeena, aka the Insectile Queen of Darkness, as I dubbed Trakeena for my reimagining as such at the time. she didn't want to play the villain, and she didn't want to play a character that has exposing cleavage in public. So I was like, okay, so I figured, I know that I realized I was being a bit too perverted and creepy, and I forgive her for that. And I forgive everyone for what, back then, for being a bit too sexually creepy with this, because knowing the fact, Power Rangers, you see, it's a kid's show, yes. But when you take a character from said children's show where the villains, and mostly female villains, gotta be all covered up and don't show all that skin, like, Trakeena's supposedly Sentai counterpart from the Sentai, they gotta be covered up, because I know it was no surprise that at least they gave Divatox in the Turbo movie a liberty to show her cleavage for a movie, but then when they bring her to the show, reintroduce her to the show proper after the movie, Divatox has to be completely, her cleavage needs to be completely censored and have her, boobs, covered. So it seemed that, like, I wanted to take that liberty to make Trakeena this scantily clad badass of all evil, because knowing to the fact that Trakeena, that we've all known by Amy Miller, Amy Roll, in Lost Galaxy, I mean, knowing to the fact Trakeena was not that scantily clad kind of character. Knowing to the fact that, you see, my original pitch for Trakeena was to make her like the Baroness, because knowing to the fact Trakeena was, knowing Amy's Trakeena, she was so bitchy all the time. But that's why we love Trakeena, don't we? I mean, knowing the fact she went from being Scorpius' daughter, being a whiny, spoiled brat, to, what she ended up being on the show. And think of all the memorable quotes, and, you see, I wanted to do a Trakeena that wasn't those Power Rangers will pay for destroying my father. Never, ever mess with Trakeena! And, to, like, what Sienna Miller's Baroness was, with, what lines did she say? I forgot. But knowing to the fact, I mean, Sienna Miller's Baroness being a badass, saying that, Duke is going to regret for killing, let my brother die during that this ambush, airstrike, stuff like that, and I don't want nothing to do with Duke, and he's a loser, and blah, whatever. I mean, I haven't seen the movie in a while, guys. I'm sorry. And I know my Trakeena impression earlier from Amy, that was weak. I was just trying to demonstrate what I really meant, because that was the Trakeena that we all know. And basing on the fact of the lines that she always said, like, there's only one ruler in the universe, and that's me. But again, I wanted to still retain that intact and still have her as Scorpius' daughter, but then yeah, guys, I mean, but however, the original pitch between her and the Red Ranger, yes, we know that in the source material of our show that Trakeena hates the Red Ranger. Why do you think several times she would beat the crap out of Leo whenever she sees him in fights? A few instances being, like, in the episodes An Evil Game, Protect the Quasar Saber, and the finale, when she was mutated. But when you look at G.I. Joe with Baroness and Duke meeting each other back to back forth, I would say it was like 3 times equally like Leo and Trakeena, basically. And that's basically what I was trying to go with. Her character was make her this badass who wants to be this mean, lean ranger killing machine, like Baroness was with in the film, in this movie, where she was like that with the Power with the Power G.I. Joe and the G.I. Joe team, and steal the nanomite warheads back from from the Joes. But if there was something like this for the Power Rangers, I guess it would have to be the Galaxy book. But then that would have to result to the fact that Terra eventually will be in the Lost Galaxy completely, and then Captain Mutiny interferes half of that movie. Maybe I could have, like, but again, I didn't want to do Captain Mutiny. So, I don't know, the Galaxy book, what was I going to do? Or, it had to be something. I mean, the Quasar Sabers is the primary weapon, so that can't work. Like, the nanomite warheads, because it wouldn't make sense having the Quasar Sabers like the warheads, where knowing the Quasar Sabers are meant to be weapons of good and used to be triumphed over evil. and not to have those mystical power, mystical swords fall into the wrong hands of evil. So, I mean, when I did this pitch, basing most of the plot off Rise of Cobra, I couldn't decide whether if I want to do, nanomite warheads, and also in Power Rangers, if warheads were a thing, and suppose if they were a powerful weapon for Scorpius and Trakeena to use, or just Trakeena. But though Scorpius at some point, we'll get to him in a moment. But it wasn't sure whether Trakeena, knowing to the fact in the show, knowing Trakeena when the Galaxy book was a thing, the Galaxy book was something Trakeena originally wanted, but then it fell into Deviant's hands, and that's why Terra ventured into the Lost Galaxy in the TV show. So how was I going to do that when I was trying to mash up G.I. Joe with Power Rangers Lost Galaxy? Again, the Galaxy book is the only piece of a particular plot device MacGuffin that, even of destruction, that I can think of. Because the Galaxy book, when they first got it, yeah, there was information about the Savage Sword and the Lost Galacta Beast and stuff back then, and then the Keonta spell, but what is there to suffice with that? And then also, the Red Ranger Trakeena romance, even though hero-villain romance, that I don't think will really work, because knowing to the fact now, if I went with the Damon and Trakeena romance, because the obvious real-life coincidence for us Lost Galaxy fans, but I decided Red Ranger and Trakeena to see if that will work, but knowing to the fact that Trakeena hates the Red Ranger, she hates the Power Rangers, she wants the Power Rangers gone, she wants Terra Venture gone, so that way she can conquer every other thing, because that was her character from the show. That never mess with me, sorry. It's just, Amy's Trakeena from Lost Galaxy is just so iconic. But though she's not as recognizable as the Space Witch who's always, I have a headache, ha! But again, I'm sorry guys, I keep harping about Rita Repulsa, but again, Rita and Trakeena have nothing in common, and none of the two female villains have nothing in beef with in common again, still. But yeah, I could have liked that G.I. Joe movie with Duke and Baroness and their little relationship. And also, like my original vision, my original pitch of the fan film, when I called it The Rise of Trakeena, I had to make Trakeena with her human form before she went to her villainous form with the Red Ranger and her romantic relationship with them. And then once when, in my reimagined version of Trakeena for this pitch back then when I did this fan film before I did the rewrites, and then someone rejected my fan film because of the schoolwork and then me stalking her thing. She could have been like, now if I made a younger, because you see my original vision of my reimagined version of Trakeena, I wanted Trakeena to be older than the Rangers together. And if Trakeena was, before she would, present herself as the human, villainous insectoid human hybrid character that we all know and love, she would be this trophy wife kind of character with some human character. That would presumably be probably, I don't know, from the Lost Galaxy villain cast. I can't do Scorpius and Trakeena together as husband and wife, because then, knowing the fact that in the original series and the source material, Scorpius and Trakeena are father and daughter, that would be considered incest. So that's why I have to figure out how I was going to reimagine Scorpius and Trakeena's characters from being, if I were to stick with their original characters where Scorpius is her father and Trakeena is his daughter, Scorpius would just be completely deceased at this point. Scorpius would just be like a small plot device afterthought, basically. And actually, to replace the nanomite warhead plot device, maybe there should have been a way where Trakeena, would just, despite that she missed, if I were to still keep Trakeena as the Scorpius daughter type character that we all know and love in Power Rangers, Prime Power Rangers continuity, maybe Trakeena would have plot plans on wanting to find something, a power source, to bring her father back from the dead. Basically. Do this black magic type of, ceremonial thing, quest, while she's still out trying to destroy the Power Rangers, while this is still a not in the near my not too distant future thing. And maybe I could have had a villain from Captain Mutiny's crew come in for this small brief amount of time, like Hexuba, to help use her magic, help Trakeena bring Scorpius back to life. So that way Scorpius could have one big final battle with the Galaxy Rangers. Well, again, I thought this, wait a minute, this is supposed to be a reimagining, but again, this is how that should have went down. That's just one of those what ifs when I originally did this fan film, and even though when I didn't have the names of the original Rangers. Because, to be honest though, yeah, I mean, I've been wanting to imagine Trakeena in the vein of Sienna Miller's Baroness at the point. Yeah, I know I've been comparing Tanaya 7 and Sienna Miller from G.I. Joe, like they're both identically the same character. Badass, brunette-haired, badass bitch characters. And you know, as much as I don't like Tanaya again from RPM, but it's just maybe I should have imagined Trakeena in that void like Sienna Miller's Baroness instead of the other way around when I kept comparing RPM and this movie all together. Because, seriously. But then, speaking of Trakeena and her, relationship and ties and intertwining with the Red Ranger, would come Deviat. Now, Deviat would have been somebody in this pitch where Trakeena and Deviat, based on my original pitch, basing on what I've seen from G.I. Joe again, suppose that Trakeena and Deviat were at a point married. And Deviat was once human. And until like something like, let's say if we did some anti-RoboCop kind of thing parallel, where Deviat was once human, but then he was mutilated to be this, android robot killer mercenary kind of character, I think. Because now I was thinking about hybriding this Deviat for this, pitch, fan film pitch, basing off G.I. Joe, mashing up the two, again, franchises with their film, film and a show. If Deviat was like Cobra Commander's Doctor persona with bits of Zartan, or actually cut the Zartan persona and go straight with Deviat being like the Doctor at some point. Because the Doctor, Rex Lewis, Cobra Commander in the film, you see, that's also another thing that a lot of people hated about Rise of Cobra. When the hell, and I mean like when the absolute holy hell in all of the history of forever with G.I. Joe have the Cobra Commander ever had multiple personalities and multiple personas? Never. I understand what they were trying to do. That I have to admit that before we had the even worser movie reboots and reimaginings and remakes, earlier in the decade, you got to think back to when G.I. Joe did something like this, taking risk of reimagining the original characters from what they once were. That when we had when they reimagined all the G.I. Joe characters except Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow's characters. Because everybody knows their beef with Storm Shadow and Snake Eyes about them being brothers of the Rajikaki clan and such. But when you have the main characters that are not the ninja characters, like the characters of Cobra, the characters of Joe, G.I. Joe, it's just hard to seeing, when the hell was Cobra Commander ever had multiple personalities? So Deviat would have been like Cobra Commander's Doctor persona when I did this fan film at a particular point in time, because I thought he, with that persona and persona alone, would match up to parallel with what we had with, Cobra Commander and, the Baroness being brother and sister. But in this pitch, before Deviat would be that devious asshole who went to overthrow Scorpius and Trakeena to, use her cocoon so he can become the more powerful ruler. But in this fan film pitch of Lost Galaxy, in the reimagining of Power Rangers Lost Galaxy was G.I. Joe thing, again, Deviat, and Trakeena would, keep their little villain persona secret from the Red Ranger. Because at some point, like in G.I. Joe with Baroness, Cobra Commander, and Duke, that the Red Ranger, Trakeena, and Deviat had something in common in the past. And I know this is something that was just a bad fan. This is just mashing up a even already awful Hasbro-based movie with a Power Ranger season that had great characters and was a great season and still considered one of the best seasons among many fans. Hence, its behind-the-scenes nightmares and such back 20-some years ago. But yeah, and then I wanted also Deviant to like show off a part of his human form mutated, his face would have been mutilated just like how we saw that glimpse in, remember in the scene in the movie when Duke was captured and he was already brought to the underwater layer of Destro and the doctors, and when the doctor, who would reveal himself as Rex, and that scene when Duke asked who is he, and then he came closer, took his mask, and that's the scene when Duke was like, "You son of a bitch, I buried you." Yeah, that scene. So I was like, I wonder if this would have been like, again, if I can imagine Leo saying that to Deviant, if he had that part persona as the doctor from that movie, and then say that, Trakeena betrayed me, and something like that along the way, and Trakeena never loved me, and I never loved her. This was all a ploy to get your attention. Whatever. I mean, just like in that movie, but knowing to the fact that it just really wouldn't work. But you guys can tell what my pitch was when I was doing this fan film. Because, you see, basically, I wanted to take Power Rangers Lost in Galaxy, update that, to make it like G.I. Joe, so it could be like, if they were like those characters. Take the same, tell that same story, but, disguise that as a Power Rangers reboot of Lost in Galaxy. If it was like G.I. Joe. Even though nobody likes G.I. Joe, The Rise of Cobra, or its 2013 sequel with The Rock, but I can see where those fans were coming from. Power Rangers, but we already know that our reboot movies deal with the Krispy Kreme and the Breakfast Clubby Power Rangers, but my Lost Galaxy fan film at the time could have been like that, but then I turned around and did all this different stuff, making my version of Trakeena, later down the road, like Elvira, because by that point, I was becoming a fan of Elvira, late, and then also hybriding her with some other shit that was going on. Also that's why I decided not to use Leo's team, being in the same situation, and have myself insert Yellow Ranger based on myself entirely, and then me and Trakeena had the, person, if I actually had an interaction with Trakeena, if she was a real character, a real person, would, had beef with her and stuff based on some predicament that happened between me and this person I dealt with at one point, and then did this Carmen Sandiego-esque storyline instead of going with the G.I. Joe Rise of Cobra-esque storyline for the Rise of Trakeena, where Trakeena wants to do conquest and destruction. And heck, even part of the fan film, Trakeena could have been like Joseph Gordon-Levitt's Cobra Commander, partly as well, where she finally would take on the Power Rangers after, due to the fact she lost her father, Scorpius, but she wants to destroy the Power Rangers in the vein of Cobra Commander, but doing multiple. And also, speaking of which, Trakeena could have had multiple personalities too, like Deviant. But when I did this original pitch, I was unsure whether if I wanted to make Trakeena have multiple personalities, like 3 or 4 personalities of a character outside of her main self. That was my original vision of the fan film before I, when I was actually making it based on what I originally envisioned and what I saw of that movie on paper. But then as soon as when I actually wanted to make it back in high school in reality, then I realized it just didn't fell through. And that's when and based on when that person rejected my movie and stuff, that's when I started that's when I transitioned from trying to making much like a Rise of Cobra type Power Rangers Lost in Galaxy fan film to a more of a Carmen Sandiego type Power Rangers Lost Galaxy fan film. And to be honest though, Carmen Sandiego is for babies. Preschoolers. So I realized, oh my god, I could have been more mature with the story in my original vision. But man, it's just as soon as she compromised I don't have a grudge against this person anymore, but in retrospect, I understand I wasn't focused on my schoolwork and stuff, and this is why I spent 8 years wallowing in depression for that long, because of those problems. But now, this original vision, this is gone. This is dead. But Power Rangers Lost Galaxy, The Wrath of Trakeena, which I've been doing now for the last 2 years. I totally did a totally different story. So whatever elements that I carried from my original vision, less of the original vision, but just only references with the whole Trakeena teasing the Red Ranger, mockingly saying honey bunny, or Rangers calling Trakeena an old lady, because again I wanted to do an older Trakeena around age 40 or whatever. If she was a hot older woman, because knowing back then, even when I was 18, 19, dumb and young and all that, and competently, I was, I've said this before, guys, I've always had a thing for cougar women, but nowadays I don't care for cougars anymore, because I realized that was complete blatant harassment, and that's why I have to regret now 8 years later for that behavior I had in the past. But I shouldn't beat myself over that past behavior. So the last character that should have been, now since I'm wrapping this up, since it's an hour and 11 minutes in, 10 minutes, is Scorpius, if he really was Cobra Commander. And like I said about the Hexiba cameo thing, bringing Trakeena's father back to life, so her and Scorpius can finally take on the Power Rangers. Knowing to the fact that the fan film was supposed to be about Trakeena completely, then see, I realized my mind was all. I mean, my passion for this fan film and mashing up with a movie based on a Hasbro property whose film sucked, with the Power Ranger season that us in our fan base is one of the best, because it was a dark season where a Power Ranger died and so forth and stuff. Take those two things together and Frankenstein the two things and think that it will work. Looking back now 8 years later. Maybe I just realized my original vision for this thing just made no absolute sense. So yeah. So Scorpius, since this is the last thing I'm bringing up with these characters, Scorpius would have been like Cobra Commander in his last form. We saw him in the first G.I. Joe film. Now, if Scorpius had a human form, he would have still been a mutant insect hybrid. And then if there was some magical thing that evil magical thing or something like that, if Scorpius wrangled his tentacled self up into the cocoon using his own cocoon he made for Trakeena to be human, no, that wouldn't really make sense. But Scorpius, despite that, now what if Scorpius never did die? Okay, Scorpius would still be a overprotective father of Trakeena in this version, and while Trakeena was doing her own thing and doing all the advances with the Red Ranger, manipulative, evil advances to the Red Ranger, grudging against the Red Ranger and stuff like that. And I mean, Scorpius would have still been alive at this point, but knowing the original source material, Scorpius would have been at this point already deceased, cremated. And despite despite the fact that the Power Rangers, what other way would have worked at the time when I did this fan film, and before I, changed up the story, and then when I stuck with the characters that I had for the Rangers, while the Lost of Galaxy canon villains like Trakeena and Villamax were still intact. Sans Furio, Tretron, and Captain Mutiny and Hexiba and such. So, that's how I would have did this fan film when I originally wanted G.I. Joe with, mesh that with the Power Rangers. Or maybe, I guess some people would have told me, well, basing on this pitch here, if this is like G.I. Joe, maybe I should have had G.I. Joe team up with the Power Rangers, Cobra team up with the Lost of Galaxy villains. Like Baroness teaming up with Trakeena, Scorpius teaming up with Cobra Commander, and like on the Joe side, Duke would team up with Leo, Scarlet would team up with Kendricks or Corone or whoever, etc., that kind of thing. Magnum Defender would team up with Snake Eyes, that would have worked. A Power Rangers, Lost of Galaxy, and G.I. Joe crossover. Think about that. But, yeah, I know. I mean, my original vision, this was before Samurai, Megaforce, Neo Saban overall was coming in, and that was my original vision. So, but even though the vision of if Power Rangers Lost Galaxy was like G.I. Joe The Rise of Cobra when I did Power Rangers Lost Galaxy The Rise of Trakeena. There'll be more details of what the Rise of Trakeena would have been next time in another podcast later, because there were some other things I need to dig up and unearth from what I originally envisioned for that fan film 8 years ago that I've been dying to bring up 8 years later in a later video. So I know for those who don't care about my fan fiction type posts and all that stuff, but for those who listened and sat through this for an hour, I thank you for listening for this. You know, what I had to say about what my Power Rangers Lost Galaxy fan film of the Rise of Trakeena could have been when I was mashing up G.I. Joe, the Rise of Cobra, because it was a fan film that even up to this point, 8 years later, took me 8 years of development hell. But during intertwining immediate years since 2014 and 2015, I had to change up the entire story to something entirely personal instead of going with my original, mashup vision and creative fanfic vision was going to be for this thing. So I thank you guys for your time watching this, rant of mine, even though it was an hour like always, because I know I like to drag one a little too long in my videos sometimes. And let me know what you guys think about this little fanfic concept, my original vision and pitch, and what my fan film of Power Rangers Lost Galaxy, the Rise of Trakeena was supposed to be, and until all the stuff turned around when I turned it from being like a G.I. Joe-esque Power Rangers fan film to later on, due to all the crap that was going on, like Carmen Sandiego, that's why I figured the rest of the retweaked plot started to suck, and that's when I had to abort the fan film and did something totally else and moved on with my life. So I hope you guys enjoyed what I said again. So subscribe and drop a like and whatnot, and until the next podcast episode. Thanks for watching.